Chapter 1: The Empire at the Core. The Galactic Empire was born in the heart of the Milky Way. Long before the outer spiral arms knew its name, before distant colonies whispered of black imperial banners and silent fleets blotting out their stars, the Empire rose among the ancient suns of the Galactic Core. There, where stars burned close together and worlds were rich with metals, energy, and life, one civilization learned a simple truth before all others: power belonged to those willing to take it. At first, the empire was only one species, one throne, one homeworld surrounded by crowded systems and rival powers. But that did not last. The first wars of expansion were quick and brutal. Neighboring planets were conquered, their governments dismantled, their fleets absorbed or destroyed. Their people were given a choice that would one day become known across thousands of light years: integrate or die. There was no third option. Those who integrated were permitted to live. Their species were cataloged, ranked, and assigned a place within the imperial machine. Engineers were taken into shipyards. Scientists were folded into research ministries. Warriors were reorganized into auxiliary legions. Farmers, miners, navigators, builders, pilots, and administrators were all consumed by the Empire's endless hunger. Their cultures were not always erased immediately. The Empire was too practical for that. Local customs could remain, so long as they did not interfere with obedience. Languages could survive, so long as imperial commands were understood. Religions could be practiced, so long as they bowed before the throne. But over generations, everything became imperial. Names changed. Flags changed. Children were taught that their ancestors had been liberated, not conquered. Old heroes became rebels. Old kings became criminals. Old songs became forbidden history. Those who resisted were made examples. Some worlds were burned until their oceans boiled. Some were cracked open for minerals. Some were stripped of atmosphere and left as silent memorials to defiance. On other planets, the Empire destroyed only the ruling class, leaving the survivors to rebuild beneath imperial law, forever aware that rebellion had a cost measured in continents. Hundreds of species had already faced that choice. Many had submitted. Many had vanished. By the time the Empire reached 40% of the intergalactic core, it was no longer merely a nation. It was a living machine spread across star systems, fleets, stations, and conquered worlds. Its borders moved outward year by year, system by system, swallowing trade routes, independent colonies, ancient republics, hive worlds, machine enclaves, aquatic civilizations, gas giant dwellers, and nomadic fleets. Every species believed at first that they were different. Every species believed their defenses would hold. Every species believed the Empire could be reasoned with. And every species learned the same lesson: the Empire did not negotiate with equals. It accepted submission, or it delivered extinction. At the edge of imperial space, scout fleets moved ahead of the main armadas, marking new systems for conquest. Behind them came the great integration fleets, colossal warships, troop carriers, orbital foundries, administrative vessels, genetic catalog ships, and planetary siege platforms. Their arrival was not chaotic. It was ritual. First came the message: a single transmission, sent on every frequency, translated into every known language of the target world. You have been chosen for integration into the Galactic Empire. Lower your defenses. Surrender all military command. Submit your planetary governments to imperial authority. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance ensures removal. Then came silence. The Empire always allowed time for fear to do its work. Some worlds surrendered before a single Imperial ship entered orbit. Others fired their weapons. Those worlds rarely fired twice. Across the inner galaxy, ruins marked the path of expansion. Dead moons circled conquered planets. Broken defense stations drifted in forgotten orbits. Species that had once filled entire sectors were now remembered only in Imperial archives, their biology preserved in cold data vaults after their civilizations had been erased. And still the Empire pushed outward, toward the middle systems, toward the frontier, toward regions of space untouched by Imperial law, toward species that had never heard the transmission, toward worlds that did not yet know the choice was coming. Integrate or die. Chapter 2. The Arasi, far beyond the burning heart of the Milky Way, beyond the crowded systems already swallowed by Imperial banners, there lived a people who measured civilization not by conquest, but by refinement. They were called the Arasi. To outsiders, the name was often translated as the Radiant Silent Ones, though the translation was imperfect. In their own language, it carried a deeper meaning: those who listen before they speak, those who seek harmony before action, those who polish even the smallest moment until it reflects the universe. The Arasi were not a military people. They had ships, certainly. They had orbital monitors, elegant patrol craft, and defensive systems built more to discourage pirates than to wage war. But violence had never shaped them. Their greatest heroes were not generals, conquerors, or warriors. They were scientists, poets, musicians, philosophers, architects, and artisans. An Arasi child did not dream of commanding fleets. They dreamed of composing a song that could make an entire hall fall silent. They dreamed of designing a bridge whose curve matched the flow of wind across a valley. They dreamed of solving an equation so elegant that elders would weep upon seeing it written. For the Arasi, perfection was not simply a goal. It was a way of life. They approached even the smallest daily activities with ceremonial care. Preparing morning tea was not a task to be rushed. It was a discipline. The angle of the wrist mattered. The temperature of the water mattered. The pause before the first sip mattered. A meal was not merely eaten. It was arranged, observed, appreciated, and only then consumed. A doorway was not simply built. It was aligned with the path of seasonal light. A greeting was not casual. It was measured by posture, tone, silence, and respect. In that way, they resembled the ancient samurai of Earth, though they had never heard of Earth and knew nothing of its warriors. Like those old human traditions, the Arasi believed mastery of life came through discipline. But where the samurai carried blades, the Arasi carried instruments, brushes, scanners, equations, and songs. Their world had made them that way. The Arasi homeworld, Arasi, was a gentle jewel of a planet orbiting a calm white star. Its gravity was light, its seasons mild, and its continents were covered in soft blue-green forests that shimmered beneath twin moons. No great predators stalked its wildlands. No brutal storms reshaped its coasts. No poisonous jungles forced its people into violence. Life on Arasi competed, but rarely with cruelty. Plants grew in layered canopies of translucent leaves. Pollinating creatures drifted through the air like floating lanterns. Rivers wound slowly through mineral-rich valleys, their beds glowing faintly at night from living crystal algae. The oceans were shallow and warm, filled with coral formations that produced low musical tones when the tides moved through them. Along the coastlines, wind passed through natural stone arches and created soft, haunting music that could be heard for kilometers. Many Arasi cities were built near these coasts, designed not to dominate the landscape, but to join its song. Their towers were slender and curved, grown from pale ceramic composites that reflected moonlight. Walkways arched between buildings like suspended ribbons. Gardens covered rooftops, balconies, and even the undersides of floating platforms, so that every citizen lived surrounded by living color. At night, Arasi became a world of soft light. The forests glowed. The rivers shimmered. The cities pulsed with gentle bioluminescent patterns, not from advertisements or warning signs, but from living architecture that responded to music, weather, and emotion. During festivals, entire cities dimmed their artificial lights so that the natural glow of the world could rise around them. Millions would gather in silence as the moons crossed overhead, and the choral choirs along the coast sang with the tide. It was a world that taught patience. It was a world that taught beauty. It was not a world that taught war. The Arasi themselves reflected the grace of Arasi. They stood on average about 4 feet tall, slender and light-boned, with long fingers suited for delicate work. Their heads were slightly larger in proportion to their bodies, giving them an air of constant attentiveness. Their eyes were wide and luminous, usually dark violet, silver blue, or deep amber, adapted to the soft twilight beneath their forests and the glowing nights of their cities. Their skin was their most striking feature. It was smooth and faintly translucent, carrying patterns of bioluminescence beneath the surface. These patterns differed from individual to individual, like fingerprints made of light. Some glowed in flowing lines along the arms and neck. Others shimmered in delicate constellations across the shoulders, temples, or hands. The light shifted with emotion, though polite Arasi trained themselves from childhood to control it. A calm elder might glow with only the faintest pulse of blue along the cheekbones. A nervous student might flicker uncontrollably in pale green around the wrists. A musician lost in performance might shine so brightly that the stage lights became unnecessary. Their clothing was equally refined. Arasi garments were soft, layered, and flowing, often made from fabric grown from engineered plant fibers. Colors were chosen carefully, not for fashion alone but for meaning. Pale gold suggested scholarship. Deep blue represented service. White and violet were worn by those in scientific fields. Silver thread marked one who had completed formal mastery in a discipline. Despite their gentleness, the Arasi were not naive. Their science was extraordinary. They understood gravity harmonics, long-range sensor theory, biological engineering, stellar cartography, acoustic mathematics, and communication systems with a skill few species could match. Their ships were elegant, efficient, and filled with instruments of astonishing sensitivity. They could listen to the static between stars and extract meaning from it. They could detect the chemical signature of a living planet from light years away. They could translate ancient dead languages from fragments of tone and rhythm. But they had never needed to build weapons capable of stopping an empire. Not truly. Not until the Empire's expansion began to push beyond the inner core. At first, the Arasi heard of the Galactic Empire as rumor, then as reports, then as verified disaster. Trade partners stopped answering. Archive worlds went silent. Refugee vessels limped into border systems, carrying stories too terrible to dismiss. Civilizations older than the Arasi had been absorbed or erased. Species who refused integration vanished behind imperial transmission walls and never spoke again. The Arasi listened. They analyzed. They debated. And because they were Arasi, they hoped there might still be a rational solution. Surely the empire could be understood. Surely communication could prevent bloodshed. Surely no civilization that vast could be built entirely on cruelty. But hope became harder to defend with every dead system. So the Arasi began sending scout ships farther than they had ever gone before. Not warships, not spies officially. They were observation vessels, built to study Imperial movement, intercept communications, and gather data before the shadow reached Arasi. One of those scout ships was the Valence Grace. It carried only 3 crew: a captain, an engineer, and a communications officer. The captain was Elder Captain Savin, a measured and disciplined Arasi with skin that glowed in calm silver lines even under pressure. He had spent most of his life mapping unstable nebular routes and was known for making decisions only after exhausting every possible variable. The engineer was Melis, practical, sharp-tongued, and brilliant with machines. Her bioluminescent markings flashed amber whenever she was irritated, which was often, especially when someone touched her engines without permission. The communications officer was the youngest aboard. His name was Nerek. Nerek had large violet eyes, even by Arasi standards, and bioluminescent patterns that refused to behave. When he was excited, his hands glowed. When he was embarrassed, light crawled up his neck. When he was lost in thought, tiny specks of blue and white appeared across his cheeks like scattered stars. He was a gifted scientist, especially in signal theory and alien linguistics. He could hear patterns where others heard noise. He could imagine meanings hidden inside static. He had once reconstructed half a damaged transmission by listening to the rhythm of its interference, a feat that earned him formal praise from the Academy. It also earned him 3 disciplinary reviews, because he had done it by bypassing 7 safety protocols and accidentally broadcasting music into a restricted military band. Nerek's problem was not lack of talent. It was imagination. He saw possibilities everywhere. In old signals, in broken machines, in forbidden archives, in ideas his elders considered distracting, improper, or dangerously unpolished. He asked questions at the wrong times. He touched systems he was supposed to observe. He followed theories past the point of caution. Among the Arasi, perfection required discipline. Nerek had brilliance. Discipline was still a work in progress. And aboard the Valence Grace, as it drifted silently near the edge of Imperial expansion, Nerek sat at his communication console, listening to the dark between stars. What he heard there would change everything. Chapter 3. The ultimatum. Nerek was half asleep when the message arrived. Not truly asleep. No communications officer on an active scout ship would ever admit to such a thing, especially not aboard the Valence Grace, and especially not under Elder Captain Savin's command. But the bridge was quiet, the lights were dimmed to night cycle blue, and the soft hum of the ship had become almost musical after 6 hours of uneventful listening. His head rested lightly against one hand. His wide violet eyes were half-lidded, unfocused, staring at a field of static that had not changed in hours. Tiny specks of pale blue light drifted across his cheeks, betraying the lazy rhythm of his thoughts. He had been trying to compose a pattern from the background radiation between stars, something faint and beautiful that reminded him of Tide Song back on Arasi. Melis would have called it a waste of ship resources. Captain Savin would have called it undisciplined. Nerek called it listening properly. The dark between stars was never truly silent. It whispered. It clicked. It breathed in old radiation and distant engine wakes and broken transmissions too weak for normal minds to notice. Most officers filtered those things out. Nerek never did. That was why he heard it first. A sharp tone cut through the static. Nerek blinked. The lights beneath his skin flared bright blue for one startled second before he forced them down. His fingers moved across the console, clumsy at first, then faster as training took over. The signal repeated. Deep band transmission. Imperial encryption pattern. His sleepiness vanished. "Captain," he said. His voice came out too soft. He swallowed and tried again. "Captain Savin." Across the small bridge, Elder Captain Savin opened his silver-lined eyes. He had been seated in quiet meditation, spine straight, hands folded, looking as if he had been carved from moonlit stone. Only the faint pulse of light along his temples showed he had heard. "What is it, Narak?" "I have intercepted a transmission." Melee slid out from beneath an open maintenance panel near the engineering station, amber irritation already flashing along her wrists. "If this is another old merchant beacon you decided sounded lonely, I swear by the moons." "It is Imperial," Narak said. Melee stopped moving. Captain Savin rose. The bridge felt smaller suddenly. Narak isolated the signal and brought it into the central speakers. His hands trembled despite his efforts to still them. The transmission was not directed at them. That much was immediately clear. It was wideband, powerful, sent across multiple frequencies in a rigid repeating structure. An ultimatum. Narak's throat tightened. He adjusted the translation matrix. Imperial syntax was harsh, layered with command markers and compliance triggers. The words came through in a cold, mechanical voice. "People of Rackle, you have been chosen for integration into the Galactic Empire. Lower your defenses. Surrender all military command. Submit all planetary governments to Imperial authority. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance ensures removal." The message ended, then repeated. "People of Rackle." Narak felt the blue light beneath his skin flicker out, replaced by a pale, sickly green at his wrists. The Rackle. He knew them. Not personally, but every Arasi student knew of them. The Rackle were their neighbors in the wider cluster, an aquatic species from a world of warm oceans, floating reef cities, and deep current libraries. Their scholars exchanged acoustic mathematics with Arasi universities. Their singers performed in tones too low for most species to hear, without translation instruments. Their diplomats were patient, humorous, and fond of long pauses before answering questions. They were not warriors either. Not like the Empire. Narak stared at the transmission data. "It is not for us," he whispered. Savin stepped beside him. "Distance." Narak ran the calculation, though he already knew the answer would hurt. "Rackle home system. Less than 6 light years from our current position." Meles climbed fully to her feet. "Can they defend themselves?" No one answered immediately. That was answer enough. Savin's face remained calm, but the silver glow along his arms dimmed. "Can we observe without detection?" Narak checked their position, their stealth profile, the radiation field around them, the Imperial signal strength. His mind worked quickly, faster than his fear. "Yes," he said. "If we remain behind the outer dust shelf and reduce active emissions." Savin turned toward Meles. She was already moving. "I can take us cold in 30 seconds. "Do it." The Valen's grace dimmed around them. One by one, non-essential systems went quiet. The bridge lights lowered until the only illumination came from consoles and the faint glow of Arasi skin. The ship's elegant engines reduced to a whisper. Sensor dishes folded into passive configuration. Heat sinks opened along the hull like silver petals, drinking in excess warmth. The scout ship drifted behind the dust shelf at the edge of the Rackle system. and watched. At first, the Rackle homeworld looked peaceful. It filled the main display in blue and gold, an ocean planet wrapped in spirals of cloud. Floating cities dotted the equatorial seas like jeweled circles. Orbital platforms hung above the world, delicate structures designed for trade, research, and weather control. Narek had seen images of Rackle Prime before in Academy archives, but never live. Even from here, even through filters and distance, it was beautiful. Then the Imperial fleet arrived. They came in formation. Not hundreds of ships. Thousands. Narek's console struggled to classify them all. Warships emerged from jump points in disciplined ranks, their dark hulls marked by Imperial sigils. Siege carriers. Integration cruisers. Troop barges. Command dreadnoughts. Planetary suppression platforms. Ships built not merely to fight, but to make resistance feel mathematically pointless. The Rackle answered with a transmission. Narek captured it automatically. Their voice was layered and aquatic, translated through harmonics. We request dialogue. We request clarification. We request time for assembly of civilian leadership. The Empire gave them 7 minutes. Narek watched the timer appear in the Imperial signal structure. 7 minutes. Not for negotiation, for fear. His fingers curled against the edge of his console. That cannot be enough, he said. Their world government is decentralized. Their reef cities vote by current assembly. It takes them hours to reach planetary consensus. Savin said nothing. Melees whispered, "The Empire knows." The 7 minutes ended. Rackle orbital defense platforms powered their shields. They did not fire first. Narek saw that clearly. He would remember that later. The Rackle did not fire first. The Empire did. The opening volley struck the outer platforms with surgical precision. Not wild destruction, not rage. That somehow made it worse. Imperial beams cut through shield nodes, communication arrays, and docking rings. Platforms that had served as research stations for centuries broke apart in silence, spilling atmosphere and debris into orbit. Narek flinched at every impact. His skin flashed uncontrollably now, blue, green, white, fear moving across him in waves he could not suppress. The Rackle transmitted again. "We surrender orbital control. Cease fire. Civilian authority requires." The transmission died as an Imperial cruiser destroyed the relay carrying it. Narek made a small sound. Not a word. Something younger. Something helpless. Savin placed one hand on the back of his chair, not touching him, but close enough that Narek knew the captain was there. "Record everything," Savin said quietly. Narek nodded. He recorded. He recorded Imperial troop ships descending through the atmosphere. He recorded Rackle defense craft rising from ocean platforms, small and outdated compared to the invading fleet. He recorded them being cut down before they reached orbit. He recorded floating reef cities turning their lights from blue to white, the Rackle signal for civilian surrender. He recorded the Empire ignoring it. The first city died beneath a kinetic lance. The weapon fell from orbit like a line of white judgment, striking the ocean beside the reef city. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the sea rose. A wall of water expanded outward, kilometers high, swallowing the city's outer rings. The delicate floating structures snapped, rolled, and vanished beneath the wave. Emergency lights flickered under the water like dying stars. Narek could not breathe. His console translated fragments of Rackle emergency traffic. Children trapped in lower chambers. Medical platforms requesting evacuation. Deep current archives flooding. Acquire tower collapsing. The words came too fast, too many. Too frightened. He tried to filter military channels only, but there were almost none. The Rackle were not fighting a war. They were drowning under one. Maylis turned away from her console, amber light gone dull across her skin. "Captain, we have to do something." Savin's voice was barely audible. "What can we do?" "We can transmit a warning." "To whom?" Savin asked. "Our people. If we transmit now, the Empire may detect us before we leave." Maylis' jaw tightened. "So we just watch." Savin looked at the display. His calm did not break, but Narek saw pain beneath it. A deep, controlled grief. "We survived long enough to carry the warning home." Narek hated that answer. He hated that it was correct. The destruction continued for 6 hours. 6 hours in which the Empire dismantled a civilization. Not completely. That was the horror of integration. They did not destroy everything. They destroyed enough. Military nodes, government centers, cultural archives, communication towers, places of memory, places of leadership, places that allowed a species to imagine itself independent. Then came the landing grids. Imperial occupation. Ships descended in perfect geometric patterns over the surviving reef cities. Troop columns secured platforms. Administrative vessels deployed towers. Translation drones broadcast new laws over the oceans. The ultimatum changed. Rackle integration has begun. Compliance ensures survival. Disorder ensures removal. Narek sat frozen at his console. He had imagined the Empire many times. He had built theories about them from intercepted rumors and refugee accounts. Some part of him had believed that if he heard them directly, if he studied their language closely enough, he might find nuance. A misunderstanding. A political logic. A path to reason. There was no hidden poetry in them. No hesitation. No sorrow. Only process. That frightened him more than cruelty. Cruelty could be emotional. Cruelty could burn itself out. The Empire was not burning. It was operating. A civilization had screamed, and the Empire had answered with procedure. When the last Rackle defense signal went silent, the bridge of the Valen's grace remained still. Narak's eyes burned. He did not remember when he had started crying. Arasi tears were rare in adults, considered a loss of inner form, but he could not stop them. Thin, luminous tracks ran down his cheeks, catching the blue light from his skin. "I heard them," he whispered. Maylis looked at him. Narak's voice shook. "All of them." The relays crossed over each other. "I heard the city channels. The evacuation channels. The children's bands. I heard them asking why the white surrender lights were not enough." No one corrected him. No one told him to regain discipline. Even Savin remained silent. Then the navigation console chimed. Maylis turned back to it slowly. "What is it?" Savin asked. Maylis read the projected course data, and the last color faded from her markings. "The Imperial fleet is repositioning." Narak wiped his face and forced his eyes toward the display. The fleet above Rackle Prime was not settling into full occupation formation. Not all of it. Several major war groups were already changing vector. Scout elements moved outward. Long-range survey ships turned toward the neighboring cluster. Toward Arasi. Narak ran the calculation himself, praying Maylis was wrong. She was not. The projected route appeared in pale red across the map. Rackle Prime, Outer Transit Corridor. Arasi Border, Arasi. Estimated time to contact, frighteningly short. Narak stared at the line as it crawled toward his homeworld. He imagined the bioluminescent forests under twilight, the silver rivers, the choral songs, the cities dimming their lights for festivals beneath the moons. Then he imagined imperial ships above them. His hands began to glow white. Too bright, too uncontrolled. Captain Savin straightened. "We leave now," he said. Meles was already bringing the engines back online. "Course for Arasi." "No," Savin said. Both Meles and Narak looked at him. Savin's expression was grave. "If we run straight home, we may lead them there faster. We take the shadow route through the Velen drift, then transmit once we are masked by nebular interference." Narak nodded, though his mind was still on the red line. The Empire had reached their neighbors. The Empire had spoken. The Empire had destroyed. And now, with the same cold certainty, it had turned toward them. Narak placed his trembling hands back on the communications console. For once, he did not chase hidden patterns in the static. He listened for pursuit. The Valen's Grace slipped away from the ruined Rackle system, carrying the last free record of what had happened there. Behind them, the oceans of Rackle Prime glowed with fire. Ahead of them waited Arasi. And Narak knew, with a terror deeper than any he had ever felt, that his gentle world was next. Chapter 4. A plea in the dark. The warning reached Arasi before the scout ship did. The Valen's Grace slipped through the outer edge of the Velen drift, hidden inside curtains of nebular dust and ionized gas, while Narak transmitted the evidence in broken, encrypted bursts. He sent the Imperial ultimatum. He sent the destruction of the Rackle defense platforms. He sent the drowning of reef cities, the collapse of communication towers, the orbital occupation grids, and the cold projected course of the Imperial fleet. He sent everything. By the time the data reached the Arasi homeworld, the government had already gathered. The High Conclave of Arasi met inside the Hall of Resonance, the oldest and most sacred political chamber on the planet. It was not a bunker. It was not a fortress. The Arasi had never built their halls of leadership with war in mind. The Hall of Resonance rose from the center of a floating city like a cathedral made of glass, crystal, and living light. Its walls were transparent in places, showing the silver rivers winding far below. Great curved arches climbed toward a domed ceiling, each arch grown from pearl-white ceramic and threaded with glowing veins of blue bioluminescence. Sunlight filtered through layered crystal panels, splitting into soft rainbows that moved slowly across the chamber floor. Everything was round. The Arasi disliked sharp corners in places of judgment. They believed hard angles encouraged hard thoughts. The council chamber was built from circles within circles, circular balconies, circular seating tiers, round speaking platforms, curved walkways, and a central polished floor that reflected the ceiling like still water. Even the tables were crescent-shaped, arranged so no speaker could stand above another without being seen by all. Above the center of the chamber floated a spherical hologram of local space. Arasi glowed in gentle blue. Rackle Prime flickered red. Between them, an Imperial fleet marker crept forward like a wound spreading through darkness. Hundreds of Arasi officials filled the chamber. Ministers, scientists, planetary coordinators, cultural elders, defense monitors, and representatives from the floating cities all stood beneath the glass dome, their bioluminescent skin betraying emotions their discipline could not hide. Pale green fear shimmered along wrists. Violet grief pulsed beneath throats. Amber anger flashed across temples and hands. The Arasi were a people trained in control. But the footage from Rackle had broken something. A reef city vanished beneath a wall of water in the central hologram. The chamber erupted. They ignored surrender lights. The Rackle asked for dialogue. Their defense fleet did not even fire first. If we resist, Arasi burns. If we submit, Arasi survives. Survives as what? The Prime Harmonist, leader of the High Conclave, stood on the central platform with both hands folded before him. Elder Ilian was old even by Arasi standards, his bioluminescent patterns dim and steady, glowing in thin silver spirals along his face and neck. He had guided Arasi through trade disputes, famine scares, scientific controversies, and border tensions. But never this. No living Arasi had guided their people through the end of freedom. A defense minister stepped forward, his formal robes trembling around him. Our orbital shields would not last 1 hour against that fleet, he said. Our patrol craft would be erased before reaching firing distance. We have no battle line, no hardened moons, no planetary weapons capable of stopping an imperial siege platform. An elder from the coastal cities struck her palm against the round table before her. So your recommendation is surrender. My recommendation is survival. At the cost of everything we are. At the cost of remaining alive long enough to remember what we were. The chamber roared again. Far above Arasi, still hidden inside the Velen drift, Captain Savin listened through the relay channel aboard the Valan's Grace. His image hovered in the council chamber as a pale blue projection, slightly distorted by nebular interference. Beside him on the scout ship bridge, Meili stood silent at engineering, her amber markings dull and tense. Narak sat at communications, exhausted, hollow-eyed, and unable to look away from the council feed. He had never seen the Hall of Resonance like this. He had seen ceremonies there, scientific honors, musical dedications, the quiet passing of law after months of careful discussion. He had once watched a poet receive a planetary commendation beneath that glass dome, the entire chamber dimming so her skin patterns could glow while she recited. Now it looked like panic trapped inside crystal. Prime Harmonist Ilian raised both hands. Slowly the chamber quieted. We must speak plainly, Ilian said. The Empire will arrive. The evidence allows no other conclusion. The hologram shifted, showing the Imperial fleet path again. We have perhaps days. Not months. Not years, days. The word fell with terrible weight. A scientific minister spoke from the second tier. Could we evacuate? To where? Another answered. We cannot move a planet. Our colonies. Too small, too few. And Imperial scouts would find them. A young city representative rose, her skin flickering uncontrollably with green light. We could scatter, hide among other systems, and abandon Arasi. The coastal elder asked. The representative began to answer, then could not. No one wanted to say it. No one wanted to imagine the forests without the Arasi. The choral choirs with no one listening. The silver rivers reflecting Imperial ships. Ilian lowered his gaze. Then we are left with the only path that preserves life. The chamber went still. Savin's projection flickered. On the scout ship, Narek felt his stomach twist. Prime Harmonist Ilian spoke the words with visible pain. We must prepare to surrender. For a moment, the entire Hall of Resonance became silent enough that the distant river wind could be heard through the glass walls. Then grief moved through them. Not shouting this time. Something worse. Soft cries. Bowed heads, flickering skin patterns, elders closing their eyes, ministers who had argued moments before now standing with faces empty of hope. Narak gripped the edge of his console. Surrender. The word felt impossible. He imagined imperial ships over Arasi, imperial towers rising from the floating cities, imperial administrators cataloging their songs, their sciences, their children. He imagined the Hall of Resonance under occupation, its glass arches draped with black banners from the core. His hands began to glow white. Captain Savin saw. The elder captain stepped forward into the relay field. "Prime Harmonist," he said. Every eye in the council chamber turned toward his projection. Ilian looked up slowly. "Captain Savin, I request permission to speak." "You have earned it." Savin's silver markings glowed brighter, calm and controlled. "I do not dispute the assessment of our defenses. The Arasi cannot defeat the Imperial fleet. If they arrive above Arasi, surrender may be the only way to prevent immediate extinction." Narak's heart sank. Then Savin continued, "But they have not arrived yet." The chamber stirred. Savin lifted one hand, and Meles sent a new star map through the relay. It appeared beside the Imperial fleet path, showing old navigation records, mythic trade routes, and a distant, rarely traveled region of space beyond the formal boundaries of known Arasi exploration. "There may be another option," Savin said. A minister narrowed his large amber eyes. "What region is that?" The darkward reached beyond the Tamsir Veil. Several elders reacted immediately. "That is legend," one said. "No confirmed civilization occupies that region. No modern expedition has crossed the veil." Savin did not flinch. "No modern Arasi expedition." Ilian's expression sharpened. "You speak of the ancient race." A murmur spread through the chamber. Even Narak knew the stories. Everyone did. Not as history exactly. More like old starlight. Tales passed through archive fragments, trade myths, and half-translated records from species that had vanished long before Arasi spaceflight. A great race beyond the darkward reach, ancient, powerful, unconquered. A people who, according to some versions, had once shattered an empire greater than the one now rising from the core. Most scholars dismiss the stories as cultural echo. But Narak had never been able to forget them, humans. The name existed in Arasi records only as a corrupted sound attached to impossible claims. Builders of impossible engines. Survivors of deadly worlds. Warriors, wanderers, poets, and monsters, depending on which broken archive one believed. Savin looked across the council. "If there is even a chance the humans exist, we must ask for help." The defense minister's light flared amber. "Ask for help from a myth." "We are already discussing surrender to a certainty," Savin replied. "A myth is no worse than despair." That silenced several voices. Prime Harmonist Ilian studied him. "You would take the Valen's grace beyond the Tamsir Veil. Yes. You may find nothing. Yes. You may find something worse than the Empire. Yes. You may die there." Savin bowed his head. "We may die if we do not go." On the scout ship bridge, Meles turned sharply toward him. Narak looked up as well. Savin had not asked them, not yet. The captain muted the outgoing relay and faced his crew. "I cannot order this," he said quietly. "Not truly. This is outside our mission, outside our laws, and possibly outside reason. If either of you refuses, I will transmit that refusal with honor." Meles crossed her arms. "You think I would let you fly my ship into myth without me?" A faint line of silver light crossed Savin's face, almost a smile. Then he looked at Narak. Narak's throat felt tight. He thought of Rackle Prime, the white surrender lights, the voices asking why the Empire would not stop. He thought of Arasi. "I'll send the message," Narak said. Savin held his gaze for a long moment, then unmuted the relay. "We are agreed," he told the council. The Hall of Resonance remained divided. Some argued it was madness. Others argued that madness was all that remained. The discussion lasted nearly an hour, though every minute cost them. At last, Prime Harmonist Ilian called for a decision. Not a full vote. There was no time for the ancient procedures. An emergency consensus. One by one, the circles of the Hall of Resonance glowed in response. City representatives, scientific ministries, defense monitors, cultural elders, planetary coordinators. Not unanimous, but enough. Ilian turned toward Savin's projection. "Captain Savin of the Valen's Grace, the High Conclave grants permission. Go to the Darkward Reach. Send your plea. If the ancient race exists, ask them for aid." His voice broke slightly. "And if they do not answer," Savin bowed deeply, "then we return home before the Empire arrives." The transmission ended. The scout ship bridge sat in silence. Then Melis turned back to engineering. "I hate myths," she muttered. "They never come with clean coordinates." Narak let out a small, shaking laugh despite everything. Savin took the command seat. Course for the Tamsir Vale. The Valen's Grace turned away from Arasi. It did not go home. It went into the dark. Hours passed. Then more. They crossed beyond safe trade routes, beyond maintained navigation buoys, beyond regions where Arasi charts were more than educated guesses. The stars changed subtly ahead of them, dimmed by the faint haze of the Tamsir Vale. The Vale was an ancient dust structure, a vast curtain of particulate matter and magnetic distortion that had frustrated exploration for centuries. To Narak, it looked like a wall of smoke stretched across the heavens. The ship entered it quietly. Sensors blurred. Navigation drifted. Communication ranges shortened to almost nothing. Melis cursed softly at the engines every few minutes, coaxing them through gravitational eddies and electromagnetic shear. Savin remained still in the captain's chair, watching the darkness ahead. Narak prepared the signal. Not a standard distress call. Standard calls were for known neighbors, trade partners, patrol stations, and emergency relays. This had to be broader, older, simpler, a plea. He built it in layers. Mathematics first. Prime sequences. Atomic constants. Universal markers. Then Arasi language. Then translated imperial ultimatum fragments. Then images of Rackle Prime. Then the projected route to Arasi. Then one repeated request. "We are the Arasi. We are under threat of extinction or enslavement. If anyone hears this, we ask for help." His fingers hovered over the transmitter. For once, he did not feel reckless. He felt very small. Savin's voice came softly from behind him. "Send it." Narak sent the plea into the dark. The signal vanished into the Tamsir Vale. No response came. Minutes passed. Then an hour. Melis checked the engines. Savin watched the forward display. Narak sat at his station, listening harder than he had ever listened in his life. Static. Dust interference. Magnetic noise. Ancient background radiation. Nothing. His skin dimmed. Perhaps the humans were only a story. Perhaps the Darkward Reach held nothing but empty systems and old dust. Perhaps the Arasi had spent their last desperate hours chasing a ghost. Then the console chimed, once. Narak froze. A signal appeared on his display. Not Imperial. Not Arasi. Not anything in their database. It was clean, powerful, and impossibly close. Narak's breath caught. Captain Savan stood. Meles looked over from engineering. The signal translated itself before Narak could even finish building a matrix. 3 words appeared on the screen. Then came a voice, calm and low, speaking through the dark. Please stand by. Chapter 5. The mistake. For 3 full seconds after the message arrived, no one aboard the Valan's Grace moved. Narak stared at the communication console, his wide violet eyes fixed on the 3 translated words glowing in pale white across the screen. Please stand by. That was all. No identification. No coordinates. No explanation. No promise of aid. No threat. Just 3 words, delivered by an unknown voice from somewhere beyond the Tamsir Veil. The bridge remained silent except for the soft hum of the ship's engines and the faint clicking of Meles' engineering console as it tried, and failed, to classify the transmission. Narak's fingers hovered over the controls, frozen in place. The light beneath his skin flickered nervously, pale blue shifting into uncertain green. Please stand by, he whispered. Meles leaned over her station, amber patterns glowing along her wrists. That is not an answer. Elder Captain Savan did not speak immediately. He stood behind Narak's chair, his silver bioluminescent marking steady, though dimmer than usual. His gaze remained on the communication display, calm on the surface, but Narak had served with him long enough to recognize tension in the stillness. It is a response, Savan said at last. Meles turned toward him. From whom? Savan did not answer. Narak swallowed. The signal translated itself before I completed the matrix. It entered our system cleanly. No interference. No drift from the veil. No delay pattern I can measure. Meles' expression tightened, meaning. Narak looked up from the console. Meaning I do not know how far away it came from. A silence followed that answer. Out beyond the forward viewport, the Tamsir Veil stretched across space like a wall of ghostly dust. Their plea had vanished into it less than 2 hours earlier. They had expected nothing. Or perhaps Narak had expected something impossible, though he had been too afraid to admit it. Now something had answered. And somehow that frightened him almost as much as silence. Meles folded her arms. Could be a trap. From the Empire? Narak asked. From anything. Savan's voice remained low. If the Empire had intercepted us, we would likely already know. That is not comforting. No, Savan said. It is not. Narak looked back at the words. Please stand by. There was something strange about them. They were calm, almost polite. Not like the Empire's ultimatum, not cold, not demanding. But there was weight in them too. The kind of weight that came from someone who had heard their plea and did not feel the need to hurry their reply. That should have been reassuring. It was not, because Arasi did not have time for patience. Captain, Narak said quietly, we need to report this. Savan nodded. Course for home. Meles was already moving before the order was finished. Plotting return through the veil. Engines warming. I hope our mysterious friends understand that standing by is a luxury we do not have. The Valan's Grace turned back toward Arasi space. The journey home felt longer than the flight out. Narak remained at his console the entire time, replaying the message again and again. He tried to isolate background markers. He tried to identify linguistic roots. He tried to determine whether the voice had been biological, synthetic, translated, or constructed specifically for their understanding. Nothing helped. The signal was too clean, too perfect. It was like staring into clear water and realizing he could not see the bottom. When the scout ship finally re-established long-range contact with Arasi, the government was already in emergency session. The Hall of Resonance appeared on the bridge display. Narak's heart tightened at the sight of it. The beautiful glass cathedral no longer seemed peaceful. Its curved arches glowed beneath emergency light. The round balconies were crowded with ministers, scientists, defense monitors, city representatives, and cultural elders. The central hologram no longer displayed only the Imperial fleet path. Now it showed an Imperial message above Arasi itself. The Empire had transmitted its ultimatum. The words hung in the air like a blade. People of Arasi, you have been chosen for integration into the Galactic Empire. Lower your defenses. Surrender all military command. Submit all planetary governments to Imperial authority. Compliance ensures survival. Resistance ensures removal. Narak felt all the strength leave his hands. They had already spoken. The Empire had already found them. Prime Harmonist Ilian stood in the center of the chamber, surrounded by circles of frightened light. His aged face seemed older than when they had last spoken. Silver patterns along his skin pulsed slowly, controlled but strained. Captain Savan, Ilian said, you have returned. Not yet in orbit, Prime Harmonist, Savan replied. We are approaching through the outer corridor. Did you reach the Darkwood region? We crossed the Tamsir Veil and transmitted the plea. The chamber went still. Ilian leaned forward slightly, and Narak forced himself to speak. We received a response. Every eye in the Hall of Resonance turned toward him. His skin flared blue under the attention, and he fought to steady it. It was only 3 words, he said. The central chamber quieted further. Narak sent the recording. The strange voice filled the Hall of Resonance. Please stand by. The words echoed beneath the glass dome. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. Then the chamber exploded. That is all. What does it mean? Who sent it? Are they coming? Is it a warning? Is it mockery? Could the Empire have intercepted the signal? We have wasted time chasing myths. A defense monitor struck the edge of his crescent table. The Imperial fleet will arrive in 8 hours. 8. Their surrender demand has already been received. Their countdown has begun. Another elder shouted back, and what would you have had us do? Wait here and compose our surrender songs. We may have no other choice. There is always another choice. Not against that fleet. The Hall of Resonance became a storm of fear and anger beneath glass and light. Narak watched from the scout ship bridge, feeling each voice like a strike against his chest. He wanted to tell them the message meant something. He wanted to say the ancient race had heard them, that help was coming, that please stand by was not empty. But he did not know. He only knew the voice had been real. Meili stood behind him, arms crossed tightly. Her amber glow had faded to a dull ember. They are going to surrender. Savan did not answer. On the display, Prime Harmonist Ilian raised his hands for silence. It took longer this time. When the chamber finally quieted, he spoke with the voice of a leader who had run out of gentle choices. The Empire has given us 8 hours. We have already begun preparing surrender protocols. A wounded sound moved through the council. Ilion continued before it could grow. This does not mean we abandon hope. It means we preserve life if hope does not arrive in time. Savin stepped closer to the relay field. Prime Harmonist, I request permission to remain in orbit and continue monitoring the darkward bands. Granted, Ilion said. But understand this, Captain. If nothing changes by the final hour, we must transmit compliance. I will not allow Arasi to become Rackle. Narek looked down, Rackle. The ocean's rising. The white surrender lights ignored. The children's channels. He closed his eyes, but the memories remained. The debate continued for another hour. Plans were made that no one wanted to make. Defense systems were placed on restricted standby, not because anyone believed they could win, but because surrender without caution was still foolish. Civilian shelters opened. Cultural archives began emergency duplication. Families were instructed to remain calm through public broadcasts that convinced no one. Arasi prepared to bow. Not because its people were cowards, because they loved their world too much to watch it burn. The Valan's Grace entered orbit with 6 hours remaining. From above, Arasi looked painfully beautiful. Bioluminescent forests shimmered across the night side. Silver rivers traced valleys beneath drifting clouds. Floating cities glowed in delicate patterns along the coasts. The coral reefs sang below the oceans, though the ship's instruments could barely detect them from orbit. Narek stared down at his homeworld. He had spent his life dreaming of the stars. Now he wanted nothing more than for the stars to leave them alone. Long-range sensors. Savin asked. Melis checked her display. Imperial fleet remains on projected course. Arrival in 5 hours, 58 minutes. Narek scanned the darkward bands again. Nothing. The mysterious transmission had not repeated. The unknown voice had given 3 words and vanished. Please stand by. He wanted to hate those words. He could not, because some desperate part of him still clung to them. The next 2 hours passed slowly. Arasi's orbital space filled with every vessel the government could spare. Not warships, not truly. Patrol cutters, survey craft, rescue ships, scientific cruisers, a few old defense frigates that had never fired on anything larger than pirates. They formed loose defensive and observation positions around the planet, fragile shapes of silver and white against the dark. Their crews knew they could not stop the Empire. But they came anyway. At 4 hours remaining, the public countdown began. At 3 hours, the Hall of Resonance transmitted a planet-wide message asking for calm. At 2 hours and 30 minutes, the Imperial fleet crossed the outer marker. At 2 hours, the sky above Arasi began to change. Narek noticed it first. A distortion appeared in high orbit above the planet's northern hemisphere, well away from the floating cities and major population centers. At first it was almost invisible, a bending of stars, a faint warping of background light. Narek frowned and leaned toward his console. Captain. Savin turned. Report. I have an anomaly. Melis looked over. Imperial, no. It is too close. And there was no approach vector. The distortion widened. On the main display, space began to twist. Not like Arasi jump signatures. Not like Imperial transit emergence. This was different, stranger. It looked as if the fabric of reality itself had begun to fold inward, forming a spiral of pressure and shadow. The stars behind it curved around the distortion in smooth arcs. Then darkness formed at its center. A black point, then a circle, then a vast opening void. Every alarm on the Valen's Grace screamed. Across Arasi's orbit, every ship reacted at once. Gravitational distortion detected. Unknown energy bloom. Spatial shear above northern orbital plane. Defense monitors are moving. Melis gripped her console. What is that? Nerak could not answer. The black opening grew larger. Clouds poured out of it. Not vapor, not gas, not anything his sensors could classify properly. Dark storm clouds rolled into space from the widening void, thick and heavy, and threaded with violent arcs of blue-white lightning. The lightning flashed silently, illuminating the cloud banks from within. Each pulse sent ripples across local space, making sensor readings jump and stutter. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was not aimed at the planet. Nerak realized that quickly. The distortion was close to Arasi, far too close for comfort, but its energy field was controlled. Contained. It held position in orbit like a storm waiting at the edge of a doorway. The Arasi fleet surged toward it. Tiny patrol craft and sensor ships raced from every direction, engines bright against the dark. The Valen's Grace was among them, moving in formation with an orbital monitor vessel and 2 defense cutters. Their weapons remained uncharged, but targeting systems flickered nervously across every display. Captain Mealy said, "We should keep distance." Savin's eyes did not leave the storm. "We will." Nerak listened to fleet traffic as dozens of frightened voices overlapped. Unknown anomaly expanding. No Imperial signature. Repeat, no Imperial signature. Gravitational readings beyond scale. Do not approach within 10,000 kilometers. Sensor ship Aurelion moving to forward position. The storm grew larger and larger. It dwarfed the small Arasi vessels gathering around it. The black clouds rolled outward, but never broke containment. Lightning crawled through the void in branching patterns like veins across a living heart. Nerak's skin glowed bright white now. Not fear alone. Recognition. He did not know what this was, but some part of him knew it was connected to the message. Please stand by. A sensor ship moved closest to the storm, its dish arrays extended, its hull bathed in flashes of cold lightning. Its commander's voice came through the fleet channel, tight with terror and awe. "Admiral," the sensor officer said, "sensors are detecting something emerging." The transmission crackled. The storm brightened. And from the darkness beyond the impossible doorway, something began to come through. Chapter 6. The emergence of the storm above Arasi grew brighter. It hung in high orbit like a wound in the universe, a vast circular darkness surrounded by rolling clouds that should not have existed in vacuum. Black vapor churned at the edge of the opening, folding in and out of itself, lit from within by violent blue-white lightning. Every few seconds, an arc snapped outward from the storm and vanished into empty space, leaving behind ripples that bent the stars. Below it, Arasi turned in quiet beauty. Its oceans glowed beneath the sunlight. Its forests shimmered faintly on the night side. Its floating cities still pulsed with emergency beacons, thousands of soft lights blinking in nervous patterns across the planet's surface. Above it, every ship the Arasi could spare had gathered. Patrol cutters, sensor craft, rescue ships, scientific cruisers, a handful of outdated defense frigates. They formed a loose sphere around the anomaly, small silver vessels, circling something none of their instruments could understand. On the bridge of the Valen's Grace, Nerak sat frozen at his communication station. He could hear every ship talking at once. Maintain distance from the anomaly. Energy readings are rising. Spatial distortion is stable, but increasing in diameter. Still no Imperial signature. Repeat, no Imperial signature. His hands hovered over the controls. His bioluminescent skin glowed so brightly that the markings along his fingers reflected off the console glass. Captain Savin stood beside the command rail, silent and tense. Maylie stared at the engineering display as if it had personally insulted her. "That is not a jump point," she said. "No," Savin replied. "It is not a wormhole, no. It is not a gravity shear, not a transit gate, not a collapse bloom, and not anything our instruments were built to understand." Savin glanced at her. Maylie's amber markings pulsed rapidly. "I dislike it." Narak might have laughed under any other circumstances. But then the fleet channel sharpened. A sensor officer aboard the forward survey vessel spoke, voice trembling. "Admiral, sensors are detecting something emerging." Every Arasi vessel turned toward the storm. For one breath, nothing happened. Then the darkness moved. Something enormous pressed through the center of the cloud. At first it was only a shape, a shadow inside shadow. Then lightning crawled across its surface, revealing armor. Not smooth armor. Not elegant. Not grown or curved or polished like Arasi ships. This was layered metal, dark and heavy, constructed in plates, ridges, seams, and hard angles. It looked less like it had been designed than assembled through stubbornness and force. A bow emerged first. It was long and blade-like, a massive armored prow that cut through the storm as though the cloud were an ocean and the ship was rising from beneath it. Lightning crawled along the edges, snapping across the hull and discharging into the darkness. More of the ship followed, rows of armor segments, recessed weapon ports, glowing shield vanes, heavy rail structures running along its spine. Then the full vessel came through. The Arasi fleet fell silent. It was a dreadnought. There was no other word for it. It dwarfed every Arasi ship in orbit. The nearest patrol cutters looked like fragments of silver dust beside its hull. Even the largest Arasi defense frigate seemed delicate and ceremonial in comparison. This ship was brutal, vast, and purposeful. It did not glide like Arasi vessels. It advanced like a mountain that had learned to move. Along its side, illuminated by flashes of dying transit lightning, massive letters came into view. The Spartan Narak whispered the words before the translator did. The Spartan. The name meant nothing to him, but the way it was painted on the hull made it feel ancient. Maylie leaned over her console, desperately trying to gather data. "I cannot get a clean scan," she said. Savin turned. "Interference, no. Their hull is rejecting half of what we send. The other half comes back scrambled. I am reading mass, but not composition. Energy, but not source. Shield activity, but not harmonics. Weapon structures, but the system refuses to classify them." On the main display, the dreadnought completed its emergence. The black storm behind it began to shrink, clouds folding back into the void, lightning fading, as if pulled after the ship by invisible chains. A final arc snapped across the dreadnought's hull, running from prow to engine cluster, then vanished into nothing. The storm closed. The ship remained. For several seconds, it did nothing. That made it worse. The Arasi were used to motion, communication, graceful approach patterns, polite distance. The Spartan simply held position above their world, massive and silent, its dark hull casting a long shadow across orbital traffic. Then every Arasi communication console chimed at once. Narak's heart lurched. "We are being hailed," he said. Savin straightened. Put it through. The central display flickered. A human appeared. Narak had seen no true image of one before. Only speculative drawings, archive fragments, and mythic reconstructions from old records no scholar fully trusted. The being on the screen was not a monster. That almost made him more unsettling. He was broad-shouldered, upright, and solidly built, with weathered skin and short dark hair touched faintly with gray at the sides. He appeared to be in his 40s by human measure, though Narak had no idea what that meant biologically. His face carried lines of age, stress, and experience. There was a faint scar across his brow and another along his jaw, the kind of marks that suggested he had spent parts of his life too close to violence. His uniform was dark, practical, and military, with no flowing fabric, no ceremonial light thread, no artistic softness. The insignia at his collar was simple, sharp, and severe. When he spoke, his voice was steady. "This is Commander Jack Montgomery of the Earth Defense Force, commanding officer of the dreadnought Spartan. We received your distress transmission." Narak forgot to breathe. Earth, humans, not myth. Not legend, real. Savin bowed his head, though he clearly did not know if the gesture translated. "Commander Montgomery, I am Elder Captain Savin of the Arasi scout vessel Valen's Grace." We transmitted the plea. Montgomery's eyes shifted briefly, as if reading data on another display. "We know. Your message included evidence of imperial aggression against the Rackle and projected threat against your homeworld." Savin's silver markings brightened slightly. "That is correct. The Imperial fleet is approaching. Estimated arrival is now under 6 hours. We are aware." The calmness of that answer sent a strange chill through Narak. Montgomery did not sound surprised. He did not sound afraid. He sounded as though the arrival of a galaxy-consuming empire was a problem to be solved. A new channel opened from the planet below. Prime Harmonist Ilion appeared in a smaller window, standing inside the Hall of Resonance beneath its glowing arches. "Commander Montgomery," Ilion said, his voice formal but strained. "I am Prime Harmonist Ilion of the Arasi High Conclave. On behalf of our world, I request an immediate meeting." Montgomery gave a single nod. "Granted. I will come aboard your station or descend to your council chamber, whichever you prefer." Ilion hesitated. The idea of a human standing inside the Hall of Resonance, the living heart of Arasi governance, clearly unsettled many listening officials. But time allowed no delicacy. "The Hall of Resonance," Ilion said. "We will receive you there. I'll arrive shortly." The transmission ended. For a moment, Narak simply stared at the blank screen. Then Melis exhaled sharply. "Well," she said, "the myth has a name." Commander Jack Montgomery arrived in the Hall of Resonance less than 30 minutes later. His shuttle descended from the Spartan through Arasi's atmosphere with frightening precision, escorted by every defense craft the Arasi could spare. It landed on the eastern platform of the floating capital city, beneath a sky tinted gold by late afternoon light. By the time Montgomery entered the hall, every member of the High Conclave was present. The chamber had never looked more beautiful, or more afraid. Sunlight poured through the glass cathedral walls, breaking into soft rainbows across the round floor. Circular balconies rose in tiers around the central platform. Living vines glowed faintly along pearl-white arches. Beneath the transparent floor, silver rivers wound far below, reflecting the sky. The chamber had been built to calm anger and encourage wisdom. Now it held 1,000 beating fears. Montgomery walked through the great curved entrance, accompanied by two human officers in dark combat uniforms. They were not as heavily armored as soldiers might have been, but even unarmored they seemed physically imposing to the Arasi, taller, denser, built by a harsher world. The commander himself moved with controlled purpose. His eyes studied everything: exits, guards, balconies, sight lines, the placement of officials. Not rudely, not openly threatening, but automatically, a being trained by danger. Narak watched from a lower communications platform, beside Captain Savin and Maylis. He could not look away. Montgomery looked less polished in person than he had on the screen. His uniform was clean, but worn at the edges. His face showed fatigue. The scars were real, not display artifacts. A faint bruise darkened one cheekbone, and one hand bore old burn marks near the knuckles. He looked like someone who had survived many things, and expected to survive this as well. Prime Harmonist Ilian waited on the central platform. "Commander Montgomery," he said. Montgomery stopped before him and inclined his head slightly. "Prime Harmonist." Ilian gestured toward the central hologram. The local system appeared above them, Arasi glowing blue, the Imperial fleet marker approaching in red, and the Spartan hovering alone in orbit. "You have seen our evidence," Ilian said. "You know what approaches. I do. Then I will speak plainly. The Arasi cannot defeat the Galactic Empire. We cannot even delay them for long. We sent our plea because our world stands hours from surrender or destruction." The chamber remained painfully still. Montgomery's face did not change. "Earth will assist the Arasi," he said. The words landed like light. For a heartbeat, no one reacted. Then the chamber stirred with disbelief. Narak felt his skin flare bright blue-white. "Earth will assist. Not might. Not perhaps will." A city representative rose from the second tier. "Commander, forgive me, but you have brought one ship." Another added, "A powerful ship, yes, but one vessel cannot face an Imperial fleet." "The Empire has thousands of warships," said the defense minister. "Siege platforms, integration carriers, planetary bombardment craft. You would be destroyed." Montgomery looked toward the hologram of the Spartan. The faintest trace of something crossed his face. Not amusement exactly, but close. "The Spartan is not here to fight alone," he said. Ilian leaned forward. "Then you have more ships nearby?" "No." The chamber's hope faltered. Montgomery continued, "I will call them." That sentence confused them more than it comforted them. Narak saw ministers exchange glances. "Call them." From where? The Empire was less than 6 hours away. No fleet could cross such distance in time. Not by any known drive. Not even if the humans had hidden bases nearby. Montgomery seemed to understand their doubt. "I cannot promise you this will be clean," he said. "I cannot promise your world will not be frightened by what comes next. But I can promise you this: the Empire will not be allowed to take Arasi without facing humanity first." A silence settled over the whole. Prime Harmonist Ilian lowered his head. "Then, Commander Montgomery, on behalf of the Arasi people, I accept your aid." Montgomery nodded once. "I need to return to my ship." The commander did not linger. Within minutes, his shuttle lifted back through Arasi's atmosphere and returned to orbit. Narak watched its ascent from the Valen's Grace, which had resumed position among the Arasi vessels surrounding the Spartan. The dreadnought was still impossible to scan. Now that it was fully in orbit, the Arasi sensor network had focused everything on it. Every station, Every survey craft, every military monitor tried to understand the human ship. None succeeded. Its shields distorted active scans without appearing to repel them. Its armor returned contradictory readings. Some systems suggested the hull was layered metal. Others suggested ceramic composites, energy-absorbing lattices, carbon structures, unknown alloys, or something biological which Melees declared impossible and offensive. Visually, the ship made no sense to Arasi aesthetics. Arasi vessels were smooth, flowing, elegant. Every curve was calculated to express purpose and beauty together. The Spartan looked like it had been constructed piece by piece, tiny section by tiny section, every plate bolted over another, every edge sharpened, every corner left hard. Nothing about it soothed the eye. Nothing blended gently into anything else. It was all angles, all armor, all function. To the Arasi, who built their council tables round to soften thought, the human ship looked like violence given architecture. And yet it had come to help them. Narak sat at communications, watching a signal pulse leave the Spartan. It did not broadcast through normal space. It punched through it. For a fraction of a second, Narak's console displayed a transmission path that curved into impossible dimensions, vanishing through some fold in space his instruments could not track. Then it was gone. What did he send? Melees asked. Narak replayed the signal shell. Command authorization. Fleet summons. Coordinates. Threat summary. Melees looked at him. You understood that? No, Narak admitted. But the packet identified itself before encryption sealed. Melees stared. Their encrypted military transmissions introduced themselves. Apparently, she muttered something unkind about human arrogance. Then space above Arasi began to change again. This time it did not happen in one place. It happened everywhere. The first storm opened beside the Spartan, larger than the one that had brought it. Then another opened farther out. Then another. Then 10 more. Then dozens. Across high orbit, black circular voids formed in perfect spacing, each surrounded by rolling storm clouds and violent blue-white lightning. They opened like doors kicked through reality. Arasi's ships scattered in panic, engines flaring as they rushed away from the forming distortions. Narak heard the fleet channels descend into alarm. Multiple anomalies. Repeat, multiple anomalies across orbital plane. Do not fire. Do not fire. Are these human? Energy readings matched the first emergence. The storms grew. And then the ships came through. One after another, human warships emerged from the black clouds. Some were smaller than the Spartan, though still larger than anything the Arasi had in orbit. Others were long, blade-like cruisers with heavy spinal weapons. Some carried wide armored flanks lined with rail structures. Others had bulky carrier frames, though no fighters launched. Every vessel shared the same human design language: dark hulls, layered armor, hard angles, visible weapon systems, and the unmistakable sense that beauty had never been the priority. Survival had, war had. Names appeared along their hulls as lightning revealed them. Athena, Ares, Odysseus, Hephaestus, Achilles, Hera, Perseus, Argonaut, more followed. Dozens, scores, hundreds. The count climbed so quickly that Arasi tracking systems lagged behind. Narak watched the number rise. 47, 82, 130, 200, 269, 299. At last the final storm closed. 300 human warships hung in orbit above Arasi. The Spartan remained at their center, larger than all the others, its dark hull lit by the glow of the Arasi homeworld below. For several seconds, no Arasi ship spoke. No council transmission came from the planet. No defense officer issued orders. The entire civilization seemed to stare upward in awe. Narak's bioluminescent markings glowed bright enough to illuminate his console. He had once believed humans might be a myth. Now 300 of their warships stood between Arasi and the Empire. A signal opened across every human vessel. Commander Jack Montgomery's voice carried through the fleet, calm and absolute. All ships, this is Spartan. Form battle wedge. Protect the planet. Advance to intercept. The human fleet moved. Not chaotically. Not with hesitation. 300 ships turned in perfect formation, their engines brightening, their dark hulls aligning toward the Imperial approach vector. The Spartan took the lead. Athena and Ares slid into position at its flanks. Odysseus, Hephaestus, Achilles, and the others formed layered ranks behind them. Above Arasi, the humans became a wall. A wall of blades. Narak listened as their drives charged. The Imperial fleet was still hours away. Humanity was moving to meet it. Captain Savin stood silently beside him, silver markings glowing across his face. Meles whispered, "The Empire told us to surrender." Narak looked at the human fleet pushing out from orbit. For the first time since Rackle, his fear did not vanish, but something else rose beside it. Wonder, hope. "No," he said softly. "It told us to choose." Chapter 7. No way out. The Imperial fleet was still 3 hours from Arasi when space broke in front of them. There was no warning. No long-range approach vector. No diplomatic transmission. No graceful emergence from hyperspace at the edge of sensor range. One moment, the Empire's invasion fleet advanced in perfect formation toward what it believed would be another simple integration. Its command ships had already prepared occupation orders. Its troop carriers had already loaded planetary suppression units. Its siege platforms had already calculated firing positions over the Arasi homeworld. The next moment, 300 storms opened directly in its path. Human skip-jump signatures tore across the void like wounds in reality. Black circular distortions formed ahead of the Imperial formation, surrounded by rolling clouds and violent blue-white lightning. The stars warped. Space folded. Then the human fleet came through. The Spartan emerged first. Then Athena. Then Ares. Then Odysseus, Hephaestus, Achilles, Perseus, Hera, and hundreds more. They did not arrive in a defensive line. They arrived in attack formation. A massive wedge of dark, angular warships snapped into existence directly before the Imperial fleet, so close that several Imperial captains had only seconds to react. The humans wasted none of those seconds. Commander Jack Montgomery's voice moved across the human fleet. "Open fire." The void became thunder. The Spartans' forward railguns fired first, twin streaks of accelerated tungsten slamming into the nearest Imperial dreadnought with enough force to punch through shields, armor, command decks, and engine cores in one terrible line. The dreadnought split open before its captain could issue a return order. Then the rest of the human fleet fired. High-speed railguns along the sides of the human ships lit in rippling waves. Each volley sent dense kinetic rounds screaming through space at impossible velocity. They struck Imperial cruisers, carriers, destroyers, and command vessels with brutal precision. Shields flared. Armor fractured. Engine blocks disappeared in bursts of white fire. Then came the missiles. AI-guided swarms launched from recessed cells along the human hulls, each missile thinking, adjusting, hunting. They did not fly like simple projectiles. They moved like predators. Some skimmed along shield edges, searching for weak points. Others split into smaller submunitions and attacked sensor arrays, weapons ports, or exposed drives. Some waited behind wreckage until an Imperial ship turned, then struck the newly exposed side. The Empire answered with everything it had. Energy beams, plasma lances, missile spreads, and mass drivers filled the space between the fleets. The Imperial formation was enormous, disciplined, and heavily armed. Against any ordinary enemy, its opening return fire would have broken the attacking line. Against humanity, it became fuel. The human shields caught the incoming energy and drank it. Across the Spartan's hull, blue-white channels ignited beneath layers of dark armor. Enemy fire spread across the shield lattice, flowed backward into storage capacitors, and fed directly into the railgun accelerator systems. The more the Empire fired, the faster the human guns charged. The faster the guns charged, the harder they fired back. On the bridge of the Spartan, Jack watched the tactical display with cold focus. "Return feed at 60%, a weapons officer called. "Rapid-fire cycle," Jack ordered. The Spartan side railguns shifted from measured volleys to a relentless storm. Imperial ships died by the dozen. The Empire launched fighters. Thousands of them spilled from carrier bays, sleek and deadly, swarming toward the human wedge in glittering attack clouds. The Arasi, watching from distant relay feeds, expected human fighter craft to launch in response. None did. No human pilots entered the void. No fragile cockpit craft rushed forward to meet the swarm. Instead, the human fleet released AI interceptor drones and space mines called claymores. The claymores drifted outward in disciplined patterns, then opened all at once, firing storms of car-sized tungsten fragments across the fighter approach lanes. Entire fighter squadrons vanished in glittering waves of impact. Those that survived were hunted by point defense railguns and AI-guided micro-missiles that corrected their paths faster than any biological pilot could react. The Imperial advance broke within 12 minutes. By the 20-minute mark, nearly 70% of the invasion fleet had been destroyed, disabled, or rendered combat ineffective. The Imperial Admiral attempted a tactical withdrawal. It was the correct decision. It was also too late. The humans deployed jammers. Not simple communication jammers. Not the crude static blankets used to disrupt battlefield coordination. These were deep-spectrum interdiction fields that bent targeting systems, corrupted navigation locks, severed fleet-wide command relays, and prevented jump calculations from stabilizing. Imperial ships tried to flee and found their drives unable to lock onto safe exit vectors. The Empire had integrated hundreds of species. It had destroyed those that resisted. It had crossed the galaxy, believing itself inevitable. And for the first time in generations, an Imperial fleet discovered that surrender had not been offered. There was no path forward, no path around, no way out. Jack stood at the center of the Spartan's bridge, hands clasped behind his back. "Disable command vessels," he said. "Destroy any ship that continues firing. Accept surrender from ships that power down." The order went out. Some Imperial ships complied. Most did not. Those that kept firing were erased. The battle ended less than an hour after it began. Where the Imperial invasion fleet had once moved toward Arasi, only wreckage remained. Broken hulls, drifting armor, shattered carriers, dead engines, and clouds of metallic debris reflecting the distant light of stars. Humanity had not merely stopped the Empire's attack. It had annihilated it. And then humanity did what the Empire had never expected. It followed the road back. The campaign that came after was swift. The human fleet did not stop at defending Arasi. Once the Empire's route had been traced, once captured navigation data revealed the chain of conquered systems behind the invasion, Commander Montgomery sent a simple message to Earth. The reply came within minutes: proceed. So the humans proceeded. System by system, they pushed inward. Where Imperial fleets gathered, human ships skip-jumped into their flanks and shattered them. Where occupation stations orbited conquered worlds, AI-guided missiles disabled their weapon cores before railguns cut them apart. Where enslaved species were forced to work in shipyards, human marines and liberation drones breached the stations and pulled civilians out before the structures were destroyed. The Empire had spent centuries teaching the galaxy one lesson: integrate or die. Humanity taught it another: bullies fall. Not immediately. Not painlessly. Not without cost. There were battles where human ships took damage. There were worlds where liberation came too late to save everyone. There were Imperial loyalists who fought to the last, and prison moons, where the horror of what had been done would haunt human and Arasi alike. But the momentum never returned to the Empire. It had been built on fear, and fear was fragile once broken. Conquered species began to rise behind the human advance. Aquatic Rackle survivors sabotaged Imperial ocean platforms. Mineral world laborers turned mining lasers against occupation troops. Integrated auxiliary fleets surrendered rather than die for masters they hated. Hidden resistance networks, silent for generations, came alive as human ships appeared over their worlds like dark angels made of armor and railgun fire. Within weeks, the Empire lost the outer edge of its expansion. Within months, its inner territories fractured. By the time the human fleet reached the Imperial core, the throne had already begun to collapse under the weight of rebellions it could no longer contain. The final battle was not glorious. It was not noble. The Imperial capital fleet formed above the throne world, black banners raised, command channels filled with declarations of eternal rule. The Spartan led the human formation out of fold space directly before them. Jack transmitted one message: stand down. The Empire fired. Humanity answered. By the end of that day, the Galactic Empire was no longer a power. It was history. The occupation worlds were freed. Surviving governments were restored where possible. Where cultures had been shattered too badly to rebuild alone, Earth sent diplomats, engineers, doctors, and historians. The Arasi sent musicians, teachers, scientists, and memory keepers. The Rackle, wounded but alive, began raising their reef cities again from the warm oceans of their homeworld. The war had been swift. The healing would take generations. But the shadow from the core was gone. Months later, on Arasi, Commander Jack Montgomery sat across from Elder Captain Savin in a quiet garden overlooking a silver river. They were not in a war room. Not on a bridge. Not beneath alarm lights. They sat beneath translucent leaves that filtered violet sunlight onto the moss, while distant choral tones drifted faintly from the coast. A small round table stood between them. Upon it rested 2 cups of Arasi tea, prepared according to ritual, with steam rising in delicate spirals. Jack held his cup carefully between both hands. Savin watched him with calm amusement. "You are supposed to wait before drinking," Savin said. Jack paused with the cup halfway to his mouth. "I did wait. For 3 seconds. That counts where I come from." Savin's silver markings brightened slightly. Among the Arasi, patience is part of the flavor. Jack looked down at the tea, then back at Savin. Among humans, hot is hot and thirsty is thirsty. For a moment, Savin simply stared at him. Then the elder captain laughed. It was a quiet sound, controlled at first, then warmer. Jack smiled and set the cup down. I suppose, Savin said, there are still many things our peoples must teach each other. Jack leaned back, looking out over the glowing river and the peaceful city beyond. Yeah, he said. Like how not to take 30 minutes making one cup of tea. Savin lifted his own cup with perfect grace. And how not to solve every problem by appearing in front of it with 300 warships. Jack considered that. Then shrugged. Worked pretty well. Savin's eyes narrowed with mock severity. That is a dangerous philosophy. So is surrendering to bullies. The humor faded gently, but not painfully. Savin looked toward the sky, where no imperial ships waited. Only stars. Arasi lives because of you. Jack was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Arasi lives because Narek sent a message. Because you took a chance on a myth. Because your people asked for help before it was too late. Savin studied him. You make victory sound shared. It usually is, Jack said. The silver river moved below them, slow and peaceful. At last, Savin lifted his cup. To shared victories then. Jack picked up his own. To better neighbors. They drank together beneath the glowing trees of Arasi, while above them, the stars no longer looked like threats. They looked like possibilities.